December 2001 in Japan. The PlayStation 2 is only a year into its life cycle and it's riding the golden age of survival horrors. Silent Hill 2 had been out for a few months and horror fans are looking for the next great experience. The Resident Evil series is going through changes and confusing its audience with its off-mainline game releases, with Resident Evil 3 releasing in 1999 and Resident Evil 4 not releasing until 2004. To fill in this gap, Tecmo was on the front line with a new, refreshing and unique experience in survival horror, with the first entry in this soon-to-be series known as Fatal Frame. At least, it's known as Fatal Frame in North America. In the UK, it is known as Project Zero. This is believed to be due to a communication issue during localization. The original Japanese title of the game was simply Zero. However, the team that worked on the game was known as Project Zero. While Fatal Frame employs many of the staples of the survival horror genre in terms of its approach to controls, jump scares, sound design, and fixed camera angles, what separates this first Fatal Frame from other survival horrors at the time is its approach to combat, and this approach ultimately leads to Fatal Frame offering the most tension and fear I've ever felt in a horror game. Fatal Frame might not look like much on the surface, however, over the course of this retrospective, I hope to show you more of what lies beneath the surface of this series, to explore some of the more hidden narrative elements, and what makes it all so great in my eyes. This series is going to work less as a review of these games, and more of an explanation of them. This is mainly meant to serve those who already played the game, and would like to know more about it and understand its story a little better. The setup. One look at this case won't do you any favors to draw you in. Honestly, as far as video game case art goes, it's kinda bad. However, there is one standout detail on the front, and this only appears on non-Japanese releases of the game. Based on a true story. Reading that and examining the rest of the case through this context changes everything about your first impression of the game when found just on a store shelf. While this was excellent in terms of marketing, the truth of the matter might not live up to the claim. More than this is based on a true story, it's based on a story I believe people truly told. As in, it's based on a Japanese urban legend. Allegedly. The legend in question is that of the Himuro Mansion, a supposedly haunted mansion just outside of Tokyo. Legends state that generations of families who occupied this mansion all seen the end of their occupancy via gruesome and disturbing deaths. The game's creator, Makoto Shibata, stated the Himuro Mansion was not at all related to the creation of this game despite similarities. But he has credited two other urban legends for his inspiration, as well as recurring dreams of his, and he had this to say in an interview.
In an area outside Tokyo, there lies a mansion in which is said 7 people were murdered in a grisly manner. On the same property, there lie 3 detached residences that surround the mansion, all of which are rumored to have ties to the mansion's troubled past. It's said there is an underground network of tunnels that lay beneath these premises, but nobody knows who made these tunnels or what purpose they served. Many inexplicable phenomena had been reported occurring on the property. Bloody handprints have been found splattered all over the walls. Spirits have been spotted on the premises, even in broad daylight. A narrow stairway leads to an attic where a spirit-sealed talisman is rumored to be locked away. Men have sought this talisman only to found later with their bodies broken and rope marks around their wrists. There's a crumbling old statue of a woman in a kimono, but its head is missing. If you take a photo of a certain window, a young girl can be seen in the developed picture. These incidents have provoked fear in people of Tokyo, and many believe that those who live near this area will become cursed, and the deaths of those 7 people are unexplained to this day.
And therein lies a lot of the game's themes. So let's get into the gameplay. The year is 1986. Mafuyu Hinasaki is exploring the Himuro Mansion in search of a folklore researcher, Junsei Takamine. What he finds, however, with a special sixth sense both he and his sister have and rarely gets addressed, is a mansion overrun with ghosts. Only his camera, a cherished family heirloom, can protect him. While this isn't exactly the same camera from later games, it is the same design and has the same ability, and as such, I will refer to it as though it is in fact the camera obscura. The camera obscura, ladies and gentlemen, is what makes this game so unique, and contender for scariest game of all time. The camera obscura holds a unique ability to see and damage ghosts. In fact, it is the only way to harm the ghosts. You raise your camera with the square button and take shots with X. After a short while, you will also get special abilities to use with your camera, and the ability to level up the camera's range, power, and sensitivity. The filament in the corner will glow blue around non-violent manifestations of power, and will glow orange around violent manifestations. The amount of shots you can take is limited by your film. Different types of film exist and have different levels of exorcismal power. Due to the limited nature of film, you'll need to wait until you can get critical hits on these ghosts to preserve your film and take out ghosts efficiently. To do this, you need to wait until the very moment before a ghost attacks you to snap the picture. This gameplay mechanic forces the player to face the fear head-on if they wish to continue, and to suppress their fears until the moment the tension is at its critical peak. Then the player must react, sometimes with reflexes down to only a handful of frames to release the tension. A gameplay mechanic that masterfully uses the most core and basic necessity of horror atmospheres: the art of tension and release. Shibata summed it up wonderfully when he had this to say about the idea.
We came up with the concept that controlling the fear until the very last second and defeating it, that's what horror until now has lacked, and thought a camera suited it. There are lots of traditions involving cameras that take pictures of ghosts and suck in people's souls, so I thought there must be something quite spiritual about them. We also agreed that if we were going to make something new, it had to use a concept no one had used before.
Mafuyu doesn't hang on to this camera for long, however. After learning of its power, he attempts to escape the mansion. Chased by an ominous evil, the screen dips to black and the player is left to assume the mystery of his fate. From here, we play as Mafuyu's sister, Miku. 2 weeks have passed since Miku lost contact with Mafuyu, and she sets out to find him on her own. Arriving at the mansion, Miku finds the camera obscura and continues on deeper. Outside of the battle, gameplay in this portion is more or less just a game of hide-and-go-seek or Where's Waldo, spanning the incredibly designed Himuro mansion, occasionally interspersed with some riddles and puzzles. Most of the gameplay will just be you looking for items or taking pictures of a spiritual aura, which will reveal to you another area you need to visit in order to progress past the part that you're currently at. This is true for most of the series and straight through to the end of this game. The real draw to this game lies in its narrative, its combat, and its amazing, tense atmosphere. Despite some really horrible yet charming voice acting and numerous translation errors, the sound design, fixed camera angles, setting, and occasional music stings make this one of the most tense horror experiences I've ever played. However, there is definitely some issues with its combat difficulty scaling. Where this is the first game of its kind, it struggles to keep a good balance. Ghosts often deal insane amounts of damage and have too narrow a window of opportunity to hit them. As such, this ends up being the hardest Fatal Frame game of the original trilogy. If your reflexes are amazing, however, the ghosts do tend to go down much easier as they seem to have less health overall and less ability to get away from you than they do in the later entries. So let's begin tearing the story apart and putting it together in a way that hopefully anybody could understand. After Miku obtains the camera obscura, she continues her search for her brother, and to uncover the mystery of Takamani's disappearance, being directed by a young ghost in a white kimono. More interesting than Mafuyu's fate is the history Takamine was able to uncover. Most of the story in the game is told through the acquisition of audio cassette tapes and salvaged papers that document the land's history. Due to the nature of exploration in this game, the backtracking, and all the hidden items, it can be very hard to put the background narrative together. Fatal Frame 1 is the most straightforward of them all, so missing a few diary entries won't set you back an insane amount. So let's talk about the history of the Himuro Mansion and the epicenter of its supernatural powers. In order to understand this story, you'll need to put together quite a bit of information and understand the relevance of all the different characters and events. To get the most out of it, you will also need to understand the history of all the ghosts you come across, but we're not going to get that deep into this. The first thing you'll need to understand is the HELLGATE. Beneath Himuro Mansion, at the end of all of its mysterious tunnels, exists the HELLGATE. The HELLGATE is a passageway to the spiritual world of the dead. Once every decade, the HELLGATE gains powers and threatens to open, spilling the spirits of the dead into the real world and releasing the Calamity. To seal the Hellgate and prevent the calamity from occurring, a ritual known as the Strangling Ritual must occur, followed by the Ceremony of Ropes. The Strangling Ritual involves someone known as a Rope Shrine Maiden. The Rope Shrine Maiden is chosen almost randomly through a game of demon tag known as the Blinding Ritual. Once chosen, the Shrine Maiden is raised in captivity from a young age, with the understanding that she will be sacrificed in the Strangling Ritual before the Hellgate to prevent the calamity from occurring. The Rope Shrine Maiden must make peace with life and separate herself from all things that may keep her bound to the mortal world before taking part in the Strangling Ritual. However, this ritual always takes place at the same time every year, so her time to do this is finite. In this ritual, the Rope Shrine Maiden has rope tied to each of their limbs. They lay over an altar and have the ropes pulled on 5 wheels. The ropes pull until they draw blood and stain the ropes. The pulling continues until the maiden is strangled to death and each limb strangled off. These ropes are then taken from the Shrine Maiden's corpse and referred to as laceration ropes. The laceration ropes are then blessed in the Ceremony of Ropes and tied over the Hellgate to keep the gate closed for 10 more years. This only works provided it all goes according to plan. The last time the ritual was performed, our Shrine Maiden didn't quite make peace with life before ending it. The last Shrine Maiden at the Himuro Mansion was named Kyrie. Just a short while prior to performing the Strangling Ritual and fulfilling her role as a Rope Shrine Maiden, Kyrie met with somebody new, a foreigner living on the Himuro Mansion estate as a guest. Kyrie quickly developed feelings for this man and pursued a secret relationship with him. However, it didn't stay secret for long. Having discovered her secret and fearing it could conflict with her ability to sever her ties with the real world before performing the ritual, the head of the Himuro family had her locked back up and had the man executed. It was the man's execution that led to Kyrie failing to make peace with life and failing to seal the Hellgate. When the Strangling Ritual failed, malice came through the Hellgate and became embodied within Kyrie. For the next 150 years, Kyrie, infected by the malice, reaped her revenge on all those who came to the Himuro Mansion. In order to reverse the failed Strangling Ritual and seal the power of the calamity, one must use the True Holy Mirror. The True Holy Mirror has been broken into 5 pieces and scattered to unknown locations around Himuro Mansion. It was not until Miku arrived in 1986 that Kyrie's power over the land was finally ended. Miku, having learned all about the past and the dangers of the Himuro Mansion, knew there was only one thing she could do to put an end to the torture and to hopefully save her brother, who was only still alive due to his striking resemblance to the foreigner Kyrie fell in love with. Miku, having reached the Hellgate, managed to stun Kyrie with the power of the Camera Obscura. Through a twist of fate, the Camera Obscura ends up broken because of Kyrie's immense power. From inside the broken camera, Miku discovers the last piece of the True Holy Mirror, having already found the first 4 pieces on the way down. Using the True Holy Mirror, Miku repels the evil that possesses Kyrie, freeing both Kyrie's spirit and her brother's life. At this point, Kyrie is told by the young ghostly girl who had led Miku to the Hellgate to fulfill her duty. Having finally made peace with the world she leaves behind, Kyrie takes her place at the Hellgate and seals it once and for all. As Miku and Mafuyu run, Mafuyu has a sudden change of heart and decides he cannot let Kyrie die alone, and so he turns back, leaving Miku to be the only survivor. There are alternate endings to this game where Mafuyu lives, but this one is canonical. As the game is closing out and the credits roll, you're left a bit at odds. Nobody you tried to save ended up being saved, however, your involvement at the Himuro Mansion ended a cycle of torment and sadness for Kyrie and those who may have come to the mansion at later dates. Though Kyrie seems to have been the villain of the story, she was the sad and pitiable result of a life of deprivation, brought about by a family trying their best to deal with the most twisted and unfortunate of situations. She lived a life of suffering, abuse, and denial, and at the end of all things, you helped her break free of that. Your involvement at the Himuro Mansion meant the spirits of the dead were finally put to rest. And that is the story of Fatal Frame 1. November 2003. Fatal Frame 2, as its namesake would suggest, is the second entry in the Fatal Frame series, but not a direct sequel to Fatal Frame 1. In fact, Fatal Frame 2 shed the based on a true story catchline the first game had, and opted out for something seemingly, or at least more honestly, entirely fictitious. Complete with much more attractive case art and the ominous and alluring subtitle Crimson Butterflies, Fatal Frame 2 was sure to attract and expand on the first game's core audience, and boy did it ever do just that. But the improvements didn't stop at just the size of an audience the game could net. No, it definitely didn't stop there. Fatal Frame 2 made so many leaps forward, it put the third entry in a nearly impossible to deal with situation. Regardless of how good Fatal Frame 3 would be, it certainly could not compete with Crimson Butterflies. This is reflected nowadays in the accessibility of Fatal Frames 1 and 3 versus the second. Despite not being the rarest of the Fatal Frame games, and in fact being the most popular of the three, selling more than 3 times the amount of Fatal Frame 1, it is less likely to show up in the aftermarket as fans of the game are much less likely to part with the game and put it up for sale. Releasing in Japan in November of 2003 and North America in December 2003, followed lastly by PAL regions in April of 2004, its cult status has cemented it as one of the greatest survival horrors of the console generation, and by many as one of the best survival horrors in the history of the genre. I count myself as a member of both categories. Prior to the game's release, in an interview with IGN, Keisuke Kikuchi had this to say when asked what he hoped to achieve with Fatal Frame 2.
I want to make it the #1 source of horror content. In other words, I want to provide a type of horror unique to games that will not be outdone by horror movies or novels. I want to achieve this through the use of situation and presentation, and not by grotesque imagery.
I personally believe Keisuke met his expectations, and far exceeded them. Fatal Frame 2 still plays just like Fatal Frame 1, only adding more mechanics to the camera obscura. The controls in the game are much tighter, the combat more refined to feel more user-friendly, and the fixed camera angles positioned a little better to better guide the player through the levels. It's everything a good sequel should be, a refinement of all the previous game's mechanics and a greater focus on what made the first so good, while doing away with the more frustrating elements. The only really bad thing they carried over was the voice acting. While still an improvement over the first, it is far from good.
The ritual cannot be the only way. There must be another way to save the village.
You'll notice through this video that the Fatal Frame games all share relatively the same stories with the same mythos. What changes are the characters and their motivations. So, bearing this in mind, let's jump to the real meat of what we want to cover here. Let's jump into explaining the story of Fatal Frame 2, Crimson Butterflies. Much like Fatal Frame 1, you play through the main events of the plot, but making sense of them means collecting and understanding an absolute slew of journal entries, old documents, and crystals to listen to audio messages from on your spirit radio. The history in this game is immense, and it's hidden all over the place. Where this game takes place in a much bigger area with loads of indoor and outdoor locations, dark environments, nooks and crannies galore, and an absolute insane amount of bookshelves, closets, and dressers to investigate, putting the story together is one of the biggest tasks you can do in this game. So I'm gonna do it for you, but be warned, many characters have similar names, and this can get very confusing very fast. I'm not going to do a play-by-play of the story, but I will have to do a play-by-play of the intro, just until a couple settings and characters are established for what's to come. I intend only on filling you in on the main character's main events, motivations, and purposes, so if you want more, please check the links in the description. Even with severely limiting what I'm going to tell you, this is going to be a trip. So let's begin. At the onset of the game, we see our two main characters, Mayu and Mio. While they sit by a riverside in the forest, we see a flashback of a time when they were here as children. In this flashback, Mayu takes a tumble, which results in an injury she carries on into adulthood. Even when not in the flashback, Mayu will be walking with a limp as a result of the injury. Much further into the game, we will discover this fall she took as a child was not an accident at all, but completely on purpose, but we'll get back to that later. When Mio comes out of her flashback, her sister Mayu is running through dark woods following a crimson butterfly. Mio pursues her immediately. Getting lost in the woods, Mio and Mayu arrive in an abandoned village known as All Gods Village. This village has different names depending on the localization you've played. All Gods Village exists in a bit of a spiritual dimension, and upon entering it, Mio and Mayu do as well, and so exiting it is not as simple as walking back the way they came. They walk into the village and follow the path of a ghost lady they seen ahead of them. Following this trail leads them to the first ever official camera obscura. Well, it's basically the same as the camera in Fatal Frame 1 with a few minor upgrades. This is the entry where it got its name. With the camera in hand, the sisters explore for a short while, when eventually they are attacked by a ghost. Mio defeats her with the use of the camera obscura, but passes out immediately after. When Mio awakes, Mayu is leaving to chase after more Crimson Butterflies. Throughout this game, the Crimson Butterflies will lead the way, and no, Ronald Weasley, following the butterflies is not any better than following the spiders. Mio follows Mayu to the Kurosawa house and finds the door locked. Crimson Butterflies now lead Mio to the store where she meets a boy named Itsuki, who is locked inside for reasons I will explain later. Yes, his voiceover is the worst. Itsuki tells Mio that she must leave the village before the ceremony starts, but Itsuki doesn't refer to Mio as Mio, he refers to Mio as Yai. In addition to this, he talks of another girl named Sai, Yai's twin sister. He says Sai is about to start the ritual at the ceremony house. The ceremony house is part of the Kurosawa house and is exactly where Mayu is at this moment in time. Through much adventuring, Mio does eventually find her way into the Kurosawa house. After battling a demon known as the Kusabi, Mio and Mayu reunite. A Kusabi is a demon created in something called the Hidden Ritual, wherein the members of All Gods Village sacrifice outsiders to the Hellish Abyss in an attempt to delay the repentance. Yes, I know none of that makes sense right now, but it will soon, trust me. From here, we will be chasing butterflies, tracking down documents, and battling ghosts until the end of the game. But now that the character introductions are out of the way, and the setting established, let's get to the real meat of this stuff, or we will be here all day. As stated earlier, All Gods Village exists in a spiritual dimension. The people you find all seem to be locked into a single point of time. As Itsuki said, this is the day of the ceremony. So what is the ceremony? Much like the strangling ritual in Fatal Frame 1, we now have the Crimson Sacrifice Ritual. The Crimson Sacrifice Ritual, again, much like the strangling ritual, takes place once every 10 years. In this ritual, a pair of twins known as the Twin Shrine Maidens are chosen, with one intended to strangle to death the other after spending 1 year in seclusion. The people of All Gods Village viewed twins as separate spirits split apart, and believed that the Crimson Sacrifice Ritual would reunite their souls into one. This reunion, this exchange of energy, is performed to keep shut something called the Hellish Abyss. At this point, basically, the Hellish Abyss is synonymous with the Hellgate in Fatal Frame 1. When one Twin Shrine Maiden is killed, the living Twin Shrine Maiden is then referred to as the Remaining. The Remaining will live out the rest of their days in All Gods Village to protect the land from future malevolent forces. Following the ritual, the dead Twin Shrine Maiden is believed to become a Crimson Butterfly who will also act as something of a protector of All Gods Village. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, those butterflies you follow the whole game are dead twins. But more specifically, it is the younger dead twin. At least, that's one way of looking at it. This part gets a little funny, so try to keep up. In the Crimson Strangling Ritual, the younger twin always kills the older one. This is because the older twin is always the strongest, and the villagers want the strong to survive. Wait a minute. The older one is the strong one, and they want the strong to survive, so the younger one kills the older one? That can't quite be right, right? Does that sound a bit backwards to you? Well, that's because it kind of is. The people of All Gods Village believe the older twin is actually the second to be born. Because the older one is always the strongest, and being stronger, the older twin graciously allows the younger twin to be born first. So in actuality, the second twin born, whom the villagers regard as older because they are stronger, kills the first twin born who is actually older but the villagers believe to be younger because being born first is a sign of weakness, which is indicative of age. Weird shit. If the Crimson Sacrifice Ritual is to fail, something called the Repentance will occur. The Repentance is a period of time where after failing to keep the Hellish Abyss shut, malevolent energy spills through and plunges the village into the Endless Night. Given Mio and Mayu are experiencing All Gods Village during the time of repentance, we know that the last Crimson Sacrifice Ritual ended in failure. The Repentance brought about the death of all people in All Gods Village and completely wiped the village's existence off the face of the planet. All Gods Village now exists with only ghosts as its inhabitants, as they eternally relive the moments that led up to the failed Crimson Sacrifice ritual. But why did the ritual fail? If you remember earlier, Itsuki referred to Mio as somebody named Yai, and also spoke of another girl named Sai. You probably don't need me to tell you, but Itsuki is also a ghost reliving the moments prior to the last ceremony. Itsuki himself was an altar twin, which is the male equivalent to the Twin Shrine Maiden. Just a year prior to Yai and Sai's Crimson Sacrifice ritual, Itsuki performed it with his brother, Mutsuki. Only the twins loved each other so much that their sacrifice did not appease the hellish abyss, and the ritual resulted in a failure. This led to Yai and Sai being the replacement. Itsuki, living with the fact that he killed his beloved brother Mutsuki, and had it be for nothing, vowed to not allow Yai and Sai to suffer a similar fate. Itsuki concocted a plan to smuggle the twin sisters out of the village and have them taken care of by Ryozo Munakata, a folklorist living abroad. When the ritual came about, Itsuki was discovered and locked in the storehouse. Fearing he failed to save Sai and Yai, he took his own life. But his plan wasn't a complete failure. Yai and Sai attempted to escape through the woods Itsuki showed them. Sai, being weak just like Mayu, couldn't keep up. She begged her sister to slow down and even faked falling in hopes her sister would come back for her. Sai had made peace with the ritual and didn't really want to leave the village. Yai, on the other hand, did not stop. Yai continued to run until she became hopelessly lost in the woods. Soon after her tumble, Sai was captured by villagers. After waiting a bit in hopes of Yai's return, the villagers became worried by the sheer amount of malevolence pouring through the hellish abyss and feared they had no time left to wait, and so the ritual was performed with Sai and Sai alone. Sai was strangled to death via hanging and her body was disposed of in the abyss. Without Yai there, Sai's soul did not reunite with Yai. There was no remaining, and Sai did not become a Crimson Butterfly. The ritual failed yet again, and the repentance occurred, causing Sai's body to arise from the abyss she was thrown into as a malevolent evil spirit bent on revenge. When Yai found her way out of the woods, she arrived back at All Gods Village and the repentance had already occurred. This resulted in a complete and total mental breakdown for Yai. She was then picked up by Ryozo, the folklorist Itsuki made plans with, and he took care of her from there on out. By this point, you no doubt see the similarities between Yai and Sai and Mio and Mayu. Well, the members of All Gods Village see it too. Upon arriving in All Gods Village, Sai's spirit possesses Mayu's body. Now this next bit is a bit of guesswork on my part, but I believe Sai always had some degree of power over Mayu. The fall Mayu took as a child that resulted in her limp was, I believe, due to the power Sai had over her, and even at that time was an attempt to draw them into the village. So when Sai's power over Mayu finally resulted in getting Mayu where she always wanted her, all manner of ghosts in the village organized to make Mayu and Mio the new Twin Shrine Maidens and perform the Crimson Sacrifice ritual and end the repentance. Mio, when given the chance to escape the village, chooses instead to pursue her sister to the hellish abyss. What occurs next is some real heartbreak. Mayu, possessed by Sai, fully believes the ritual must occur. Mio obliges and strangles her sister to death. I'm of the opinion this happens because Mio is now possessed or has always been possessed by Yai, but that's never actually expressed in the game. I believe this is Yai's way of setting things straight with her sister and making up for all the bad that came of the moment she abandoned her in the woods. Mayu's body is then thrown into the hellish abyss as a crimson butterfly peels from her neck where Mio's hands left a red imprint. Mio follows the butterfly, screaming her apologies. The single crimson butterfly then is followed by hundreds as more spill out of the hellish abyss and the spirits of the dead are put to rest. The repentance has ended. Mio escapes the village. Later the village is replaced by a lake after the construction of a new dam, sealing All Gods Village and the hellish abyss beneath water forever. Or so we hope. In the final moments of the game, we witness Mio sitting on a park bench gazing at the lake that used to be All Gods Village, with a crimson butterfly mark on her neck. Mayu and Mio are one. And I like to believe so too are Yai and Sai. And that is the story of Fatal Frame 2, Crimson Butterflies. July 2005. Fatal Frame 3 The Tormented releases in Japan, followed nearly half a year later in November of 2005 for the West, and lastly in PAL regions in February of 2006. By the time this released, the age of horror was more or less dead. The war between Call of Duty and Medal of Honor was on the rise. Resident Evil 4 has already released and redefined the survival horror genre to be more action-oriented. It seemed people were over the age of traditional survival horrors. Tank controls and fixed camera angles were viewed with ire, and anything daring to have a slightly slower pace than that of Resident Evil 4 just wouldn't be tolerated. The PlayStation 2 on top of this was standing in the shadow of a new console release just a year away, so lifetime sales of Fatal Frame 3 would not have long to accumulate. As a result, in the West, Fatal Frame 3 only managed to net about half the amount of sales of Fatal Frame 2. Possibly in response to these horrendous sales, this would be the last Fatal Frame game to get a physical release in the West, with some other Fatal Frame games simply not coming out at all. Although some chance for the series still remained in Japan, where Fatal Frame 3 launched with even greater sales than Fatal Frame 2. But Fatal Frame 3 truly deserved more than it got. It's my firm belief that Fatal Frame 3 just came out at a time when the audience wasn't there for it. Even to this day, it is easy to find sealed copies of this game on a store shelf. In fact, mine was sealed prior to my playthrough for this video, 12 years after its release, and new copies are still available for purchase. While the game incorporates almost all of the same mechanics as the last two games, it is such a slick playing game, there's no way I can truly see this as somehow worse than the first Fatal Frame. But it may be on par with it. Just like the last few games, you navigate traditional Japanese houses, taking out ghosts with your camera obscura, collecting documents and sound bites, as well as journal entries that fill in the history of the land and the specters you come across. There's a good emphasis on puzzles, but battle is even more front and center than before. Thankfully, this shift to being a bit more action-focused does nothing to detract from the amazing atmosphere of the game. The area you have to explore is much bigger than before, but not a lot of it feels too varied. If you have played Fatal Frame 1 and 2, you will recognize a lot of the areas in this game, and even some of the characters. Even though much of the story will be filled in the same way as the last two games, Fatal Frame 3 takes a different narrative approach, having you change between 3 different characters to play different parts of the game. This split storyline makes this game possibly the hardest to fully piece together, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's the deepest. Far from it, in fact. While putting the game together will take a lot of explanation, you will realize not too many things are actually being explained. They are simply just harder to explain. Hands down, Fatal Frame 3 is the best looking game in the trilogy, but it comes at a cost. The final boss battle of the game really seems to push the system's limits to its breaking point, and this will be the only part of the gameplay I talk about with any sort of depth. In the last battle, the frame rate slows to a single-digit crawl due to all the visual effects and sounds going on at once. This part wouldn't have frustrated me too much if it weren't for the need to make quick decisions. During this battle, you enter a kind of bubble where a ghost spawns. This ghost can spawn right next to you, and being touched by them will instantly kill you, booting you back to the main menu and making you have to reload, so you will need to escape fast. Unfortunately, acting fast is impossible due to the aforementioned frame rate, so death is generally unavoidable. When not simply dying, this part would actually freeze my system with regularity. All in all, this took me an hour to complete like this. It is because of this last battle, I downgrade the overall experience of playing Fatal Frame 3 to only being on par with Fatal Frame 1 and not above it. Outside of this, it's a much better game. But we all know how Fatal Frame games go at this point. So let's get right into making sense of what I'm sure is another confusing and relatively hidden storyline. As stated earlier, Fatal Frame 3 has you jumping between 3 different characters. Without a doubt, the main character here is Rei Kurosawa. Before the game even starts, we see a flashback to a car accident. Rei approaches, and in the overturned car, her fiancé, Yu Asoyu, lies dead. We next flash forward to Rei alongside her assistant Miku as she explores the Kuze shrine, which she suspects to be haunted. While her belief of its haunted nature is waning, she captures a picture, and in the picture she sees Yu. This moment is where we first see that Rei is the Tormented, as spoken of in the title of the game. This is the moment where we first see the effects of a curse that has been affecting Rei since her fiancé's death. So what is the curse? The curse Rei is now a victim of is referred to as the Tattooed Curse. Although it's never actually called this in-game, this is the name the community has given it, and it fits quite well. The curse causes her to be whisked away into the Manor of Sleep every time she goes to bed. The Manor of Sleep is the dream world version of the Kuze Shrine, the shrine where she captured a picture of you with her camera. The Manor of Sleep is a place where all the previous victims of the tattooed curse also now reside, and a place where the prerequisite for entry is to be the sole survivor of a tragedy. In the Manor of Sleep, victims of the tattooed curse are tormented with images of their loved ones, always walking further and further away from them, leading them deeper and deeper into the Manor of Sleep. Propelled by emotion, the victims of the curse will always follow their dead loved ones. Because of this, Ray frequently sees the ghost of her fiancé in the Manor of Sleep, and tries her best to catch up to him, feeling that if she did, she might be able to bring him back from the land of the dead. Every time one awakes from a dream of the Manor of Sleep, a tattoo will grow on their skin that only they can see. Each time they go to sleep, that tattoo grows in size. Due to the nature of the curse, the afflictions and side effects will grow as the days progress, and the line between sleep and reality will begin to blur. All those who have claimed to have gone to the Kuze Shrine in their dreams before have ultimately gone missing. Once one is consumed completely by the tattoo, they are whisked away into the Manor of Sleep, forever, never to be seen again. But Rei isn't the only one visiting the Manor of Sleep. One of our other main characters, Miku Hinasake, who you may remember as the sole survivor of Fatal Frame 1, is now working as Rei's assistant and living in her home. Each night Miku goes to sleep, she too is brought into the Manor of Sleep. Rei and Miku together work to uncover as much information as they can about the Manor of Sleep and the curse that afflicts them and put a stop to it before they too go missing like all the others. So we know our main characters made it to the Manor of Sleep because they are the sole survivors of a tragedy. But why does the Manor of Sleep exist at all? The Manor of Sleep was formerly a real-world place known as the Kuze Shrine. Now, however, it exists solely in a dream state. So how did it get here? To know this, we must first understand the role of the Tattooed Priestess. The Tattooed Priestess is somebody tasked with making sacrifices to prevent something called the Unleashing from happening and to stop the spread of the Rift. The Rift, in simple terms, is the divide between the land of the living and the land of the dead, and is presented in-game as a large body of water. The Rift gains power from those in the real world struggling with the pain of loss, and who bring that loss into their dreams. To stop the spread of the Rift, that pain must be sealed. The Unleashing is the event when dark forces cross over from the other side of the Rift and spill into the real world, bringing about death, destruction, and miasma. The Tattooed Priestess, once appointed her role, must live her entire life in the Kuze Shrine and undergo 2 rituals to prevent the Unleashing from happening. These 2 rituals are known as the Piercing of the Soul and the Impalement Ritual. Let's start with the former. The Piercing of the Soul ritual involves 2 people known as engravers. Engravers, for lack of a better term, are simply tattoo artists whose job it is to tattoo snake and holly designs into the skin of the tattooed priestess to symbolize the pain of loss. The tattoos the engravers commit to the skin of the priestess are believed to contain the pain of all those who come to worship at the Kuze Shrine. This is done so that the living who have experienced loss will not bring that pain of loss into their dreams, as such a pain gives power to the other side of the rift and allows it to spread. Instead, that pain is transferred to the tattooed priestess, who will sacrifice herself into an eternal slumber at the shores of the rift and prevent the rift from spreading. Being an engraver doesn't sound like a hard job, but given its spiritual nature, you best believe it comes with no shortage of sacrifice. Much like the tattooed priestess, the engravers must also live life contained to the Kuze Shrine. In order to accurately be able to tattoo the pains of others into the tattooed priestess, the engravers must first show they adequately understand pain. To do this, the engravers pierce their arms with thorns, they tattoo themselves, and gouge out their eyes, followed lastly by running a rope through their eye sockets and binding the rope around their scalp. The ink they tattoo the priestess with must be harvested from the blood of worshippers, living or dead. This ink is known as the ink of the soul. When an engraver's job is complete, their hands are cut off and they are retired. Next, we'll move on to the second of the tattooed priestess's ritualistic expectations, the impalement ritual. When the tattooed priestess's body is covered in tattoos, she is led by 2 handmaidens to a stone building known as the Chamber of Thorns at the edge of the rift. This is where all tattooed priestesses end up. The handmaidens take tattooed stakes and hammer them through the priestess's hands and feet, nailing her to the Chamber of Thorns, where she and the pains of those that have been etched into her skin will rest forever, and the spread of the rift will be stopped. Keep in mind, I said rest here. My wording on this is very specific. The priestess is being put to sleep, not to death. Like most rituals, if the priestess has not managed to make peace with her life before her eternal slumber, the ritual will fail. The pain of others will not be properly sealed, and the rift will gain power, causing the bridge between the land of the dead and the land of the living to erode. In a last-ditch effort, if the priestess fails, her tattooed skin is ripped from her body while she is still alive. Her skinned body is then ferried across the rift as an offering of pain to the other side to temporarily prevent the unleashing. The tattooed skin, on the other hand, is preserved and put on display in the Kuze shrine. So obviously, the last time the ritual was performed, it failed. We know this simply by the existence of the tattooed curse and the manner of sleep. So what happened? Say hello to Reika Yukihiro. Reika lived in a village near Kuze shrine. By all accounts, her life was pretty normal. She met a man in her village named Kaname and fell in love. Kaname eventually left to study abroad. During his time away, something tragic occurred, resulting in the deaths of Reika's entire family. Reika was then adopted by the Kuze family. She moved to their shrine and took up their family name. Understanding pain and tragedy all too well, Reika wanted to do everything in her power to prevent others from feeling the kind of pain she did, and so she volunteered herself for the position of tattooed priestess. Reika was then, as per tradition, designated to live in a hanging cage where the only outsider she ever got to see was a woman named Amane Kuze. Amane would be Reika's caretaker until the impalement ritual occurs. The two shared many stories with one another and got along well, but the ritual approached as naturally and as inevitably as was expected. Prior to the impalement ritual, one other ritual must occur. This ritual is performed by the priestess alone. It is necessary for a tattooed priestess to separate her own pains from her body as to not interfere with the sealing of the pains of others, and to be at peace when the time for eternal slumber arrives. To do this, one must etch their own pains into a mirror. When a priestess's body is completely covered in tattoos, they are to break that mirror as a symbolic representation of their altruism and their willingness to separate their body and mind from their own interests. When the mirror is broken, the impalement ritual is to begin. During the impalement ritual, many measures are taken to put the priestess into an eternal sleep. Notice again, I did not say death here. This is very important. Yes, the ritual involves hammering stakes through her hands and feet, but as silly as this sounds, those stakes are so that she does not get up and move around in her slumber. Now I bet you think Reika messes this up, right? Given the series' history, it would be a safe assumption, but nope. Reika is impaled without issue. The real issue comes from Amane, Reika's caretaker from the hanging cell. Through the many stories Reika and Amane swapped, Amane discovered Reika was in love with Kaname. Unbeknownst to Reika, Amane and Kaname were half-brother and sister. Amane grew an attachment to Reika and did not want her to live such a miserable life. Hoping to save her, Amane brought Kaname into Kuze shrine and straight down into the Chamber of Thorns. At that moment, Amane was found out by somebody named Yashu Kuze. It was Yashu's job to make sure all rituals went off smoothly and the spread of the rift was prevented. Yashu pursued Amane and Kaname to the Chamber of Thorns. As she arrived, Kaname was in the process of waking up his estranged lover Reika. In a violent turn of events, Yashu murders Kaname without a moment's hesitation. Just as this is happening, Reika awakes from her slumber that was supposed to be eternal. The image she sees before her, the first image she sees upon awaking, scars her so deeply that the tattoos on her body spread to the one place a priestess is not supposed to be tattooed. Reika had not completely let go of her pains. The tattoos spread to her eyes and turned them into mirrors, and all the pain that was etched into her body was reflected back into the world, causing an event known as the Unleashing. The Unleashing, as stated earlier, is when the rift spreads and the bridge between the land of the living and dead is dissolved. Yashu tried her best at this moment to seal the manor into a dream, so the rift could not infect anything beyond Kuze Shrine, but she was only partially successful. While she did contain the manor to existing only within a dream, Reika's power was immense enough that she could project that dream into the sleep of those who had lost loved ones and drag them into the manor forever. But not only that, there was a second way to get into the manor. You could also enter the manor if anybody with the tattooed curse so much as dreamt about you. And that's just how another character, Kay, whom we'll talk about shortly, managed to get his way in. So how do we break the curse this time? How do we reverse the Unleashing? Rei and Miku follow their dead loved ones, Yu and Mafiyu, deep into the shrine. Miku unfortunately goes too far and is consumed by the tattooed curse. Before Rei gets too far in, she receives a visit from a man named Kei. Kei was a friend of Yu's and is also the uncle to Mio and Mayu from Fatal Frame 2. Kei explains that Mio has been suffering from the tattooed curse as well, and as she has been following Mayu deeper and deeper into the manner of sleep each night, she too is soon to succumb to the tattooed curse. Kei and Rei combine all the research they have and attempt to come up with a plan. Kei proposes they find new tattoo stakes and redo the impalement ritual, and that's exactly what Kei tries. Kei enters the Manor of Sleep and gathers the stakes. He makes it to the Chamber of Thorns and finds out that Reika didn't even lift a finger to create all the evil that we'd seen so far. Reika has been impaled here the whole time, but she doesn't stay that way. Nah, that bitch rips herself right up and traps Kei in the Chamber of Thorns with her. Probably safe to assume now Kei's dead as well. Next, Rei decides to try her luck, and wouldn't you know it, in the lamest way possible, she's successful. Rei makes it to the Chamber of Thorns, and one hell of a boss fight later, Rei defeats Reika with the Camera Obscura. Nothing really fancy going on here. Following Reika's defeat, Rei puts Reika and Kaname's body on a boat together and sends them across the body of water we know as the Rift. This is a very obvious metaphor to the ferryman, as Reika and Kaname's body is ferried to the other side of the Rift that represents life and death. The tattooed curse ends here. But not before one last goodbye. Among many souls now departing the Manor of Sleep, Rei spots her dead fiancé Yu. She runs to Yu and pleads that she stay by his side. Unwilling to allow Rei to throw her life away, Yu strips the curse from her body and tells her that so long as she lives, so too does a small part of him. Rei awakes to find herself and Miku have been spared from the tattoo curse, both now with the understanding that the dead are only dead if they are forgotten. And to truly honor the loss of a dead loved one, the most noble thing you can do is go forward, to live life and carry their memory with you. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the story of Fatal Frame 3. Also, Kei's life is spared, but who cares? They don't even give him screen time here at the end.